As we begin today, I want to let you know that the sources assignment information is available under Blackboard, under assignments. This is where you submit your, as you're working on your papers, you submit your sources. You need to submit 5 to 7 sources related to the topic that you've chosen. If you choose a different topic between the one you submitted, which most of you submitted, not everybody did, but the one you submitted and when you submit your sources, just let me know that in the file what your new topic is going to be. As I mentioned, it's not an ironclad agreement. If you have any questions about how to find sources, I tried to give you a couple places to start under the assignment, but by all means let me know how best to help you with that and help you to find the sources that will help you with your paper. That is due February 26th, which is 2 weeks from Thursday. So 2 weeks from Thursday. If you have any questions after looking at the assignment, please get in contact with me about that. Hopefully it's pretty straightforward. We continue today in the 17th century, particularly looking at different ways Christians conceived of the relationship between culture and society. Where we finished up last Wednesday was looking at the concern about witchcraft and how much that reflected concerns about society. Well, certainly there was a way in which witchcraft was believed to be real. It often reflected that this was a kind of an overturning of society and social order. And the most famous case, at least in the United States, was the Salem incident, particularly toward the end of the 17th century, from February of 1692 to April 1693. And we talked last Wednesday about, there's this hysteria that has been around in Salem and Massachusetts on minor scales. There were certainly witchcraft trials before the main one in Salem. But Salem is best remembered because of the size of the people that were accused, hundreds arrested, 25 people dying related to that. We ended up by talking about the case that kind of started off the Salem hysteria, particularly this handful of about half a dozen girls who started to act very strangely, oddly, at various times, having this kind of erratic behavior in a variety of places, including in church services, excuse me, and that the suspicion began to be prevalent that they were suffering from witchcraft. And once a slave in the minister's household was named as a witch, she started to accuse others, and then the girls started to accuse others as well. Various people were brought into court under the accusations of these girls. And as I mentioned last time, there seems to be an awful lot of class and economic tensions here as well. These people that are doing the accusing are the daughter of a minister, they are farmers' daughters, they are daughters of servants, and the people that are being accused are women mostly of independent means. Either their husbands died and they had a lot of wealth or had economic independence themselves. During the witchcraft trials, the actual trials, there was an awful lot of performance by the girls. The courts relied on what was called spectral evidence, which was the accusation by the girls of the person's specter, which was the image of a person, the image of a witch, kind of if you know astral projection or something like that. The thought was that witches could kind of project their soul, their spirit, some sort of specter, ghostly apparition who could then afflict other people. Well, the girls would claim that while the person was on trial, right? So, for example, a woman named Sarah Nurse, they would say, well, Goody Nurse, which is what good wife, and so Goody Nurse, her specter's pinching me, and she's up there being, asked questions by the judge, and she's pinching me, and she's done this and that, and so the specters are supposedly very active, pinching, choking people. The girls claim that they see the witches' familiars. The familiars were animals like black cats, which were supposedly assistants to the witch. And so a lot of the evidence that was used in these trials were the things that were going on, the performances that these girls were giving during the trials. For example, here is the case of a woman named Bridget Bishop. Bridget Bishop had been accused of witchcraft but a decade earlier, and had been found innocent, but was accused again in the Salem trials. And so she's brought into the courtroom to be interrogated. And as she comes in, the girls start pitching these fits. They're shaking, they're howling. And throughout the trial, Bishop claims her innocence, right? That she's not a witch, this has not happened. The judge asks the girls if they've been afflicted by her. They all claim that she has. They charge Bishop with hurting them, as well as trying to get them to sign the devil's book, which was essentially kind of, that they're going to follow the devil. So they're saying that, she's consorting with the devil. She's trying to get other people to consort with the devil as well. Bishop's response is she's never seen any of these girls before, right? And she's never been around them, and was, as she said, innocent as an unborn child. And so, she becomes increasingly frustrated with these continual attacks on her character, and the judge becomes more and more focused on trying to get her to to confess that she is a witch. And so, as they are involved in this interrogation, here's some of the things that go on. The transcripts, of course, have continued to be extant. So Bishop staunchly states, "I'm no witch." To which the judge replies, "Why, if you have not wrote in the book, yet tell me how far you have gone? Have you not to do with familiar spirits?" "I have no familiarity with the devil," Bishop responds. "How is it then that your appearance doth hurt these?" Right, your specter, this ghostly apparition. "I am innocent." "Why do you seem to act witchcraft before us?" asked the judge. "By the motion of your body, which seems to have influence upon the afflicted." So as she would make gestures, the girls would moan in pain and all these things. So kind of like, she's up there, pointing and those kind of things, and they're claiming that she's hurting them. "I know nothing of it. I am innocent to a witch. I know not what a witch is." "How do you know then that you are not a witch?" "I don't know what a witch is." "Well, how do you know you're not one then?" "I do not know what you said." "How can you know you are no witch, yet not know what a witch is?" "I am clear. If I were any such person, you should know it. You may threaten, but you can do no more than you are permitted." "I am innocent," she said, "of being a witch." However, she was found guilty of being a witch and was one of those that was executed. In 1692, Governor Phipps, who was the governor of the colony, ended the special witchcraft court. But the proceedings kind of held on until about April. They moved them from a special witchcraft court to the main court that was used for most cases. Probably part of the reason that he was so interested in ending the court is that his own wife ended up being one of the people questioned for being a witch. The names of some of those that were condemned and executed were later cleared. Ann Putnam, one of the girls, would eventually ask for forgiveness for being deluded into accusing innocent people. This took place 10 years later after this. There have been a variety of theories regarding what happened to the girls. What is it that's going on? One of the most common ones, and probably the one that you've come to, is they're faking it. Right? That's probably the one that seems to have the most acceptance. Scholars kind of prefer that explanation. But there have been other explanations that are rather interesting about what has happened, right? And so if the girls actually had something happen to them or thought that they were experiencing something, what was it that they were experiencing? Some people suggested, well, given that there had been a large rash of Indian attacks in the decades and even months prior to the witchcraft outbreaks, perhaps there was some sort of psychological trauma that these girls were experiencing. And so that's been one explanation. Another explanation is that they were eating bread that was infected with a fungus that is used to make LSD. And so essentially they were tripping. They'd eaten this bread, they were hallucinating, and that's what was causing all this. Other people suggested, well, it was a neurological disorder that was coming from birds. So birds kind of infected people in the area. Probably they were making it up. That seems to be the most likely. But you can see how people try to explain what's been going on. There's not too many people that have actually suggested that these women were witches, and that's why they were troubling them that way. But it was, no matter what was the case, it was a very troubling experience for all those involved, especially for the families of those who had their loved ones executed. Turning from witchcraft and the work of the devil, we turn to church and state, which, depending where you are politically, might not be that far of a change. We've covered this a little bit already in some of the discussions we've had, and obviously we've talked about Christians supporting the idea of the church and state being intertwined. Perfect example of that, especially in thinking about colonies, of course, is the Puritans. The Puritans followed Calvin's ideas of the Holy Commonwealth, where the government is going to enforce religious duties and morality. And so if you don't show up to church, you could face civil fines. If you swear, you could face civil fines or imprisonment. If you were considered a heretic, right? You were teaching something false. You often faced a religious trial and a civil trial, like in Hutchinson. There were a variety of laws in Puritan New England we talked about already, about what you could and could not do on Sundays, requirements for church service. But not every Puritan supported this. We talked about people like Roger Williams, who said, this kind of activity, certainly Williams supported social order, right, and he supported laws. But having the government enforce things related to religion often ended up in coercion and not free commitment. But as we saw a couple of things in the 17th century as philosophies and difference in political science and thinking, we see the beginnings of this movement towards a separation of church and state. Both Milton and Locke were influenced by Puritanism, but were not Orthodox Puritans. They had that influence in some of their thinking. And both are really important for later thinking about church and state, especially John Locke. A lot of the ways that we think about church and state separation in the United States were shaped by John Locke. Milton argued for things like the freedom of the press. He even encouraged the overthrow of oppressive monarchs. And a lot of that is not just coming from political philosophy, but Reformation notions of the importance of the individual conscience, the moral agency that each individual has. And so even though Milton especially might not have been Orthodox, may have denied that God was the Trinity, he still supports this idea of some of the things related to how Reformation thinkers were encouraging the importance of the individual. Locke had similar sentiments, but also argued for a different role of government. Ultimately, for Locke, government was for the purpose of maintaining order in society, maintaining safety. And so he begins to reject the notion of the godly prince that Luther really supported. And Luther kind of had that monarchical idea of this godly prince in charge of a nation or a country. Instead of the government being in charge of virtue, it was the citizens that should be the upholders of virtue, not the state. Locke himself believed in God, but believed that reason was the best way to understand God and morality. Right? So even there, you're starting to get this separation of reason and revelation. Ultimately, the magistrate, the government official, should respect moral judgments based on reason, even if they might disagree with the actual judgments. As Locke said, a magistrate, quote, can right me against my neighbor, but cannot defend me against my God. So that's individual standing before God, and so the government needs to kind of stay out of it. The magistrate has, quote, no more certain or infallible knowledge of the right way to attain relationship with God than I myself, where we are both equally inquirers, both equally subjects. And so the magistrate stands before God just like the individual does, and so the governmental official can't provide for the individual the right way to God any more than they can provide the right way for God themselves. In Catholic circles, many in the hierarchy continued to support the idea that the government and its officials were subservient to the church. And so the church is the highest organization in the world, and below that is government, as opposed to some of the other models we've talked about. But not all Catholic monarchs agreed with this, right? So the priests, the bishops, the pope, they're all in line with government subservient to the church. Kings who were Catholic, however, didn't always buy into this, particularly in France. During the Avignon papacy in the 14th century, this is the time period where the Pope was centered in France. France had received a lot of rights and concessions and exceptions that other Catholic countries didn't have. And during the 1600s, they decided to use some of those. The Council of Trent, during the Reformation, had argued for a more centralized authority in the Pope. They really wanted to make the Pope a very strong authority. But the French decided they were going to exercise some of their rights. Particularly, one of the concessions that was given to France was when the Pope made a decree, it would only become effective in France when the French government promulgated that decree. Now, promulgate means to kind of announce it, approve it. Well, when they get the decrees from Trent, the French government says, we're not promulgating these. We're not going to let them be known. Kind of cut France off from some of this. This attitude was referred to as Gallicanism, this attitude of the French government above the Pope's decrees. Gallicanism came from the ancient name of France, Gaul, G-A-U-L, and so that's where Gallicanism came from. Opposed to the Gallicans were the Ultramontanes. Ultramontanism got its name from across the Alps, right? So the Latin for across the mountains or across the Alps, meaning pointing to the Vatican. Right? And so Ultramontanes supported the Pope. Gallicans wanted French freedom. Lots of power. The king had lots of power over the church in France, but the clergy had some power as well. We talked about, for example, Cardinal Richelieu, who had a lot of political power, not just religious power. And in fact, as we talked about, the church was the master of Canada until 1663, when Louis XIV took a more active role. In 1682, Louis XIV declared that the king was independent of the Pope, a general council was above the Pope, and that the Pope was not infallible. And we'll talk about the doctrine of infallibility later on. And so there's this more and more attempts from the French king to distance themselves from the Catholic Church. On the other hand, though, in 1685, Louis XIV released the Edict of Fontainebleau, which revoked the Edict of Nantes, which we talked about earlier, which had been signed by Henry IV in 1598. Okay, what's all that about? The Edict of Nantes had given the Huguenots a lot of rights and protections in France. Fontainebleau ordered all Huguenots to either convert to Catholicism or leave the country. So a lot of them left the country. Additionally, Protestant churches and schools were closed or destroyed. Several hundred thousand, it's estimated, anywhere from 200,000 to 900,000 Protestants left France over the next decades. So we see a variety of ways Christians are attempting to understand church and state, with some saying they need to be separate, some saying the church over the state, some saying the state over the church, some wanting both of those together. All of it setting the stage for a lot of what we think of today in modern notions of the church and state, especially when we think of how secular Europe has gotten and how we think and have a lot of disagreement in the United States over church and state. Any questions about culture and society, any of the things that we've talked about so far, witchcraft or church and state?